My new top 150 big board for the NFL draft came out this morning over to 3013. We're going to explore some of it here today on Locked On NFL Scouting.
You are Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes, your daily podcast for NFL and college football scouting. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is better than this? It's guys being dudes here on the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast. I am your co-host, Kyle Krabs, here today on the show. Want to thank all of the everydayers who are checking in with us here on Locked On NFL Scouting. My usual co-host, Joe Marino, not available today. He's fine. Don't worry about him, but best wishes to Joe. Hope to see you tomorrow on the show. But we're flying solo here, and because of that, we're going to lean into a top 150 big board. I don't want to have the free agency conversation without Joe and start that party as we get ready for legal tampering next Monday, and then the league calendar year opening less than a week from now. So a lot of headlines obviously happening. You've got names like Sam Hubbard retiring. Mitch Morse just this morning announced his retirement. You've got players that are street free agents signing contracts like Durham Smythe going to Chicago adding on the offensive line. The Bears seem intent to kind of get a lot of pieces in place before free agency starts. So there's plenty to react to. And what we're going to do here today on the show as a result is save that meat on the bone for Joe. Today, top 150 big board. And we've done about 3 prospects a day once a week here on Locked On NFL Scouting, going back to really probably, September or October. So it's created a really sturdy foundation of the early portions of the class. But, me having done about 200 players, a chance to kind of look a little deeper. It's not really a lot of conversations that we've had the chance to have on the program just yet. And having a solo microphone, we're going to take advantage of it here today on the show. So I want to shout out some of the risers throughout the early chapters on the heels of the NFL Combine. Names that didn't necessarily, not all of them came in and tested really well and that locked them into a certain place. But more so just, as there's been more questions around some of the other names in that stratosphere, and some of those names maybe are falling off, or maybe some of those names you still have questions with versus you just get more comfortable as you finalize all your opinions. Name like Armand Membu, for example, and he tested great. But Armand Membu came into the combine. I had him ranked around 20th, and now with his finalized grade, he ranks 12th, and he's tied with Kenneth Grant, who ranks 11th. So you could now put him in a stratosphere of, say, top 10 pick, and that be expected off of my board, which is not necessarily supposed to be predictive in nature, but that's kind of the nature of how everybody reads a big board, right? Shemar Stewart did come in just like Armand Membu and check all the boxes with the testing, and doing so at a reduced weight than what he did on the roster at Texas A&M. You would like to think that, plus a different scheme, unlocks a lot of the disruptive nature of Shemar Stewart and what he's capable of being. Stewart ranks 6th for me. He ends up pushing up in front of Josh Simmons and Mason Graham and Malachi Starks, are some of the names that now sit right behind Shemar Stewart for coming in at like a 99th percentile tester, effectively, the long and the short of it. Another name that's rising for me, you might not be surprised to hear Nick Emanwari's name is another NFL Combine superstar, up to 25th. Emanwari was in the late 30s for me in the pre-draft or pre-combine update. And with him being another 99th percentile tester, I could tell you the difference. I grade on a 100-point scale. Emanwari's grade versus the player ranked 38th, which is late 30s stratosphere of where he was at now, is 1 point on the 100-point scale. So really, with a lot of these guys, you have the vast tier in which they're set and established. But then once you get that last little bit of incomplete information filled in with what you have at your disposal on the outside looking in, a 60th percentile tester versus a 99th percentile tester is enough in that small of a stratosphere and within the same tier to really shake it out and bump a guy up in the way that Nick Emanwari is now represented as a top 25 player on my board. There's some other players who I don't want to say I'm down on these guys, but when I first watched them, the shift in enthusiasm that I've had of like, hey, I think you could be a top of the first round type of player or a first half of the first round type of player versus kind of where the dust is settled and the excitement when you first watch the film kind of dies down and you get more context across the rest of the league and uh, you're a little less emotional coming off the film study. I think two good names to invoke here would be like Xavier Watson and Tet McMillan. Watts, when I first watched him, I thought, man, like if you finish the college season strong, I could see you being a top 20 player. Now, Eamon Worry has surpassed him in my rankings. I still like Xavier Watts. I have him ranked 31st. Do I think he goes in the first round predictively? No, but that's the positional value of weighing out a safety. But I do think he could be a high post ball hawk on the back end with his ball skills. But you consider the safeties that I have in front of him, and there's two. It's Malachi Starks and Nick Eamon. I would trust both of those guys fitting and running from depth and tackling and supporting the run more than I trust Xavier Watts. And some of that came courtesy of the college football playoff run that Notre Dame went on. And some of that is just removing yourself from the immediate high of watching that tape. As far as Tet McMillan, he's going to be wide receiver 3 for me when it's all said and done. He's going to be behind Emeka Egbuka and Matthew Golden. And there's a production conversation with Golden that if you are kind of more analytically based, if you're more rooted in the numbers profiles, and I know a lot of like dynasty and fantasy users utilize a lot of those tools and have found some correlation for that to be predictive in nature. And you're going to look at Tet McMillan and you're probably going to look at Matthew Golden and you're going to say, well, I'll lean in the guy that's put up the big time production. And I get that. But I do think moderation of everything is probably the safest way to approach player evaluation. And as I've watched across multiple schemes for Matthew Golden, the way in which he wins, and then obviously that dynamic athletic profile that he put on display on top of that, while playing in, how do I phrase this politely but accurately? No quarterback in college football had an easier job the last year and 2 years, really. That's not necessarily applicable to Matthew Golden, than what Quinn Ewers did. A lot of scheme throws, a lot of manufactured touches, a lot of talent across the board, a lot of other people to worry about. And for Matthew Golden, I think there's a lot of meat on the bone for what his production profile can look like in an offense that doesn't have to manufacture a lot of schemed throws because they want to keep the quarterback working within a box, which is what Texas did this year for Quinn Ewers. And you can contrast it to when Arch Manning played, and it was a different offense. Like, it felt like a different offense. So projecting that forward, Matthew Golden and then Emeka Egbuka, I think, is just really solid across the board. Those guys are going to slot in front of Tet McMillan, but I still have Tet McMillan as a top 32 player in the class. Right. So there's some other day 2 types of risers that we can get into with some of my favorite day 2 talents. But just wanted to spotlight some of within the top 32 movement and shaking. Jahad Campbell, another great tester, is a guy who moved up in the universal big board rankings that I have here. Obviously, this is not grading for any specific team, but he's up and locked inside the top 20 as well. So a little bit of love, a little bit of a spotlight on some of the movers if you've been consuming the big boards throughout the course of this season. We're going to shift gears to day 2. It's coming your way next here on Locked On NFL Scouting. Stick with us. You've probably heard of Chewy. They really do have everything you need to keep your pets happy and healthy, whether you're shopping for food, treats, or even pet health care. Chewy makes it fast, easy, and affordable. With over 100,000 products from all of your favorite brands, Chewy has everything your pet needs, from food to treat to toys to beds to grooming, and not just for dogs and cats. They've got supplies for birds, fish, reptiles, and small pets 2, Chewy makes it easy to manage your pet's health with prescriptions, telehealth vet visits, and even in-person vet clinics rolling out nationwide. AutoShip is a game changer. You could set up automatic deliveries for food, treats, or essentials so you never run out. You can easily change or cancel at any time. Chewy has everything you need to keep your pets happy and healthy. Right now, you could save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewy.com or clicking the link in the description. Save $20 off your first order with free shipping by clicking the link in the description. Minimum purchase is required. New customers only. Terms and conditions do apply. See site for complete details. All right. Day 2. We have sung the praises of Jacob Parrish on this, but this is a very pro Jacob Parrish podcast. But he does check in at 42. I mean, the testing profile is outstanding. 200-pound press corner with sufficient length. Now, the stature's a question, but runs in the 4.3s. I mean, unless you're just going to be a sizist, I don't really know how you fade Jacob Parrish to the point where a lot of these draft simulators still have him available at picks in the 90s and potentially even into the 4th round. Why? Because he's 5'9 3/4? Come on now. I don't think so. I think this is way too good of a football player. I was glad to see Tate Ratledge test well. For me, he locked in a 2nd round grade in eval for me, and I know he was banged up a little bit throughout the course of this year. But Ratledge is kind of the missing middle class that feels like, he could be the bridge, I think, between a lot of the grades. In total for offensive linemen, and I have final grades done on how many offensive linemen? About 35 offensive linemen I have final grades on right now. Not a small number, right? Right. I feel pretty good about where I'm at this stage of the game, the first week in March, to have that many guys done. But amongst my top 25 offensive linemen, I have 25 offensive linemen ranked in rounds 1 through 4 in this year's class. You look at the names that are expected to go in the 1st round. I think you could probably say you'd have 6 of them, with Will Campbell, Armand Membu, Josh Simmons, Kelvin Banks, Tyler Booker, and Josh Connerly. Those are 3 of those guys I have unequivocal 1st round grades on. Another 3 I have late 1st / early 2nd round grades on. But they rank inside the top 32. I only have 3 names with just authentic 2nd round grades. It's Gray Zabel, Ariante Ursary, and Tate Ratledge. And then you got to wait a little bit. And then there's this gap to Savanea, Marcus Mbo, Donovan Jackson, Ozzie Trapilo, Cameron Williams, Anthony Belton, Miles Frazier, Charles Grant from William & Mary, who came in and weighed in at 310 pounds, which is just an awesome weigh-in for him, which I think will lock him in as a top 100 player. In total, if you omit the 4th round guys, I've got 18 in the top 100. But I have, of that group, half of them are 3rd round grades, and another 6, draft dudes do math, are in the top 32. So you really have this middle class void, I think, within the top 100, where you're either kind of stocked in the back end, and are you overdrafting because you missed the boat, or do you get one of those early ones? And that's not an enviable decision that I think teams have to make. So at Tate Ratledge testing well, because he was a fringe. He's ranked 56th on my board. The 2nd round bucket goes from a 79.99 to a 77. And Ratledge locked himself in a 77.5. So he's in the bottom part of that bucket. But nevertheless, having another 2nd round grade kind of alleviates some of that pressure, where it's a guy that I would feel comfortable with if I was a team and I needed to check that box, or if I wanted to make sure at some point I had enough flexibility in my draft plan, if I'm not drafting exclusively for need, to say, hey, like if I come back after I go a different direction early, is anybody going to be left that I feel like would be a contender to be in that shortlist conversation? And then maybe the positional need serves as the tiebreaker. So a nice win for Tate Ratledge. As I look at the rest of day two and guys on day two that are rising for me, or guys that I like, Jaylin Noel, obviously with his testing from Iowa State, more of a slot wide receiver, gets pushed up in front of Xavier Restrepo, who I had an early 3 on throughout this process, and I had a third on Noel, but with the testing profile for Noel being what it being, where he was such a prolific player at pretty much every opportunity that he had to execute a test or a time, he does get pushed up. He's 61st on the board, so now he's up in front if I'm looking at slot-only players. And I don't use that phrase in a derogatory way to those guys, because that is really, for most teams in 11 personnel, a starter. Right? I still think you're a starter, but I think you're most dangerous on the inside. Noel gets pushed up in front of Restrepo, who ranks 69th on my board as a result. A couple of the big winners and movers here on day two. Jamari Caldwell from Oregon, being this super-sized defensive tackle that you see the flashes of athleticism on the tape, and then I thought moved pretty gracefully. Caldwell's a name that I think deserves a little bit of love here. He ended up moving up from fringe top 100. He's in the 70s. So if your team that needs some penetration ability but also needs some mass on the interior, I think Jamari Caldwell is a very realistic day two option for your team, whether you're picking late in the second round or if you're picking at any point on the third round. Bashal Tutin, obviously running at plus 200 pounds as fast as he did. What he ran as fast as Devon Achane did 2 years ago, but did so with like 20 extra pounds on his frame. Home run hitter type of player. I think he's going to end up being a really good wide zone scheme fit for somebody and is going to be a problem. Names that slid a little bit but still stuck on the day two group. We'll see what Gunnar Helm's pro day ends up looking like after he twisted his ankle. But Princely Umanmielen is a name for me who, as the rest of this class tests, showcases athletic profiles, that is one for me that I think my scope of what his contributions are ultimately going to end up looking like is a little bit more narrow, where I think he's probably going to end up being a good designated pass rusher, because you had the questions with the run defense on the film. He's explosive, 38-inch vert, 10.6 broad jump. Those are good times. And the 4.72 is fine for a player that is in the mid 240s, but I was expecting a 4.5, 4.6 time. And then you have the 3-cone drill, which is like the agility stuff for him was sufficient. But the NFL.com and Next Gen Stats score for his athleticism score, he ranked 28th amongst edge and defensive end testers with his size-adjusted athletic profile. And I was really banking on him being more of a prolific type of player. So as a result of that, that is a player for me that's sliding a little bit is Princely versus like Braden Swinson, for example, being somebody who I ended up really liking his tape. Swinson for me ends up very, very close, 70th. Princely I have ranked 78th, but I do have Swinson's jumped them in my rankings. And I would consider those guys to be pretty static at this point. But case in point, Swinson outweighed Princely by 10 pounds and was better in both the agilities. Now, that's all he did was the agilities. But those kinds of dynamics, when it's all really closely bunched like that, can be the difference maker, can push it one way or another. I'm going to shout out we go to 150 with this board. Now, we're not set back there. There's guys I have to finalize the grades on that are going to push into the top 150. But as things currently stand with final grades, we go to 150. So we're going to shout out some day three talent that I think can be starters in the right situation here on Locked On NFL Scouting. All right. So fourth round grades. My fourth round grades start at 105 this year. And I don't think I don't see anybody on my to-do list that I have yet to do that I could see pushing into a third round grade or better. So from a grades distribution, if you include first and late or just first round grades, I have 15. Late ones and early twos, I have a total of 22. So that takes you through to 37, which makes sense. If the end of the cutoff is for late one, early two is player number 37, that's close. Maybe in a perfect world, you'd have another 3 or 4 so that you'd be at like the first quarter of the second round for the late first, early second round grade distribution bucket. Players that I have with just a second round grade, I have 26. But if you include the late one, early two players and the first round grades, that takes you to player number 63 on the board is my last second round grade. And then obviously you have a little bit of a bigger bucket for the third round grades. I have 41 third round grades in this year's class, going from player number 64 to player number 104 are all third round grades. So you're kind of getting that bell curve distribution. The fourth round grades, I have 33, so it's not quite as big as the third round bucket. But then the fifth round bucket, when things really start to narrow, gets a little crazy. I'm up over 40 in that bucket right now as well. So predictively speaking, I think my bell curve is going to look pretty close to what the actual pick availability looks like. It's just there's going to be times where you're making picks and you're deficient in value, where you don't necessarily love the value of any of these players and would love to get out, but the 5 teams around you all feel the same way. Players I think I have fourth round grades on that can be situational plus starters for a team. I'll shout out Jaylin Travis from Iowa State. So Jaylin Travis played 4 years at Princeton. Really only played 1.5 of those seasons. He had the COVID season, and he played 150 snaps his freshman season. And then he was a starter for a year. And then the year after that, he started 6 games and then got hurt and missed the rest of the year. And then he transferred after 4 seasons from Princeton to Iowa State and then went to the Senior Bowl. And you're talking about a big fella here now. It's 6'7 and a half, 340 pounds, who can play tackle, but showcase some positional flexibility to play inside a guard. Like, that's the kind of background I want to bet on guys like that. I want to bet on a guy that has, maybe 1,000 snaps of Ivy League reps under his belt before 1 year at Iowa State. With that kind of size and frame and mobility and control, body control at that point, I think that's very realistically the kind of player I could see getting NFL coaching and hitting. Malachi Moore at safety, I have him at 129 in my rankings. I do have a fourth round grade on him. Smart football player, not a very dynamic football player, but a player who, if you like the instinctive element on playing on the back end, I think he's a really sharp player. And because of some of the positional impact on his grade, I don't think he'll go super high, but I think as a core special teams guy, role specific player who, depending on what you can accommodate around him with the rest of the players in your back seven, if you told me that he was going to play in a split safety type of role or there was going to be a lot of zone and area zone coverage, and you were going to ask him to match routes very frequently, I think he can utilize his ability to play off of blocks and his processing power and his vision and how wide his vision is to end up being somebody who can be a starter for somebody. I would also shout out DJ Giddens, who has become kind of a deep sleeper for a lot of people. Had a great combine with testing, put up great numbers. His background's another one that's pretty interesting, kind of like a Jaylin Travis. He played his high school football at Junction City in Kansas, but he got a late start in football. He didn't play organized football until his sophomore year of high school. So he was unranked and did not have buzz and walked on to Kansas State in 2021 and then redshirted his true freshman year. So he played sophomore, junior, senior season of high school football, and then redshirted his freshman season in 2021 at Kansas State. And now you're at 2022, put up 500 plus rushing yards He's played a grand total of, Draft Dudes do math, 6 seasons thus far as a player, and has hit big-time production in the last 2 years, but as a bigger back that has explosiveness, has an athletic profile that you would have some confidence in being able to create yards for himself. I don't think in a really good running backs class where I've got a bunch of guys. I mean, I've got 7 guys with 4th round grades, and then I've got another 7 guys with day 1 or day 2 grades. So you're talking about 14 running backs ranked in rounds 1 through 4 this year's class for me. And there's a couple of guys that I need to finalize. Jordan James from Oregon's 1. I don't know that he'll get that high. Jadon Blue I need to finalize as well. So you could potentially be up to like 16 running backs in rounds 1 through 4 in this class. I think the surplus of that for whoever had the takes on take that will set a record for running backs drafted and be up over 30. I think with how good some of the trench class is and the surplus here at running back, I think that's going to work against this group to kind of hit those numbers, though. Let's just spotlight a little bit deeper into the class, looking at risers and fallers through the top 150. I hope you guys enjoyed this solo walk through my latest top 150 big board for the 33rd team here on today's episode of Locked On NFL Scouting. I expect we'll get Joe back tomorrow, whether that's a free agency preview or takes on takes. Well, you're just going to have to stay tuned, find out, follow Joe. Joe's at the Joe Marino. He might ask for your takes. If he doesn't throughout the course of the day today, you can be rest assured we are going to be doing the free agency preview on Friday. I'm Kyle Krabs. That's going to do it for us here today on the show. Appreciate you guys, as always, for coming on in and talking a little football. Hope to see you again tomorrow.